Today's tale unfolds in the vibrant corridors of a historic New Orleans building where Marlon, a black building owner, faces harsh racial discrimination from a white resident who mistakenly assumes he doesn't belong. This interaction, loaded with prejudice and assumption, sets the stage for a powerful story of resilience, justice, and ultimately, an unexpected twist that redefines power and respect. Marlon's response to the blatant disrespect isn't fueled by anger or a desire for revenge, but by a deep-seated belief in justice and dignity for all. As tensions rise, the story takes us through Marlon's calculated, yet profoundly impactful decisions that not only challenge the status quo, but also invite a communal reflection on equality and prejudice. The climax is as surprising as it is inspiring, leaving a lasting impression on everyone involved, including you, our viewers. What unfolds is a masterclass in handling discrimination not with retaliation but with strategic grace and education, leading to transformative outcomes that echo throughout the community. By the end of our story, we're left to ponder the true meaning of justice and how sometimes the most powerful response is one of calculated compassion. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Let's dive into a narrative that promises to stir deep emotions and spark a crucial conversation on racism, resilience, and the power of turning the other cheek with dignity. Let's begin. Before we dive into this story, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. A white woman, consumed by ignorance and prejudice, cruelly humiliated a black resident of her building, unaware that the very man she belittled was, in fact, the owner. With an icy indifference that revealed her deep-seated bias, she spat out her words. "What are you doing here? This place isn't for you," she sneered, her eyes casting judgment as they swept across the lobby and landed on him. Standing there with quiet composure, he held his key, the symbol of his ownership, but to her, this well-dressed man was nothing more than an intruder in a space she deemed too refined for someone like him. Her mind raced with assumptions. He must be lost, perhaps a delivery man, or worse, a freeloader who had somehow slipped through the cracks. Never for a moment did she entertain the possibility that she was wrong, but the reality was far from her distorted imagination. This man was not merely a resident. He owned the building, every apartment, every corridor, every brick that composed the walls. Yet, she remained oblivious. With a smug sense of superiority, she escalated the situation. "I'm going to call security. People like you have no place here. If you don't leave now, you'll be thrown out so fast you'll regret stepping foot inside," she threatened, her arrogance dripping from every word, as if she were granting him a favor. Yet, despite her venom, the man remained composed, allowing her to speak. He understood the power of silence, how it could echo louder than any insult. He wasn't intimidated, he was patient. He watched her closely, every hateful word she uttered like daggers aimed at his dignity, each laced with prejudice so blatant it would make anyone's blood boil, but not his. He stood still, unflinching, knowing that the battle she thought she had won was far from over. And when she had finally exhausted her cruel tirade, he calmly responded with a quiet strength. "Go ahead, call security, but prepare yourself for a surprise." At that moment, her world briefly stopped. Confusion flashed in her eyes as she tried to grasp the meaning of his words. She couldn't comprehend it. How could someone like him, in her eyes, hold any power? She had spent her life believing people like him were insignificant, shadows to be dismissed. But he, standing before her with the weight of his truth, held a secret that would shatter her false sense of superiority. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 1 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. She walked away with an air of triumph, utterly convinced she had put him in his place. Little did she know, her ignorance was about to be exposed most dramatically. The very foundation of her beliefs about who mattered, who belonged, and who deserved respect was about to crumble before her eyes. The man who had remained so silent, so composed, was about to reveal the truth. He owned the very ground she stood on, the entire building she considered her own, and with that truth he would dismantle her arrogance. But what would happen next would not only teach her a lesson, it would leave an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed it. His response to her humiliating words wouldn't be out of spite or a need for revenge, but rather a demonstration of dignity and justice. This man knew that real power wasn't found in retaliation, but in rising above, turning an insult into a revelation. The woman, still wrapped in her ignorance, thought she had won. But her victory was an illusion, one that would dissolve the moment she faced the truth. Soon she would be forced to confront her smallness, to reckon with the consequences of her prejudice. And it wasn't just her who would be shocked. The entire building, every resident, every neighbor who had turned ablaze. Because when someone is unfairly belittled, it's not the immediate response that defines them. It's the way they transform the injustice into a moment of awakening. And that's exactly what was about to happen. This man, who she saw as insignificant, would soon stand tall in a way no one expected, changing the narrative forever. The aftermath of this encounter would reverberate through the building, sending shockwaves through every tenant. No longer would they see things through the same narrow lens. And as for the woman, her world of superiority and entitlement would come crashing down. What would she do when the truth was finally laid bare? How would she react when she realized the very person she had so callously demeaned held the power she could never possess? The answer to that question was more shocking than anyone could have anticipated. The man's response, calculated, graceful, yet powerful, would leave everyone speechless, redefining the meaning of respect, justice, and true authority. His next steps would be remembered not for their vengeance, but for the message they sent: never underestimate a person based on the color of their skin, because the real power lies in character, wisdom, and the strength to rise above hate. And so, this story, which began with an act of prejudice, would end with a lesson no one would ever forget. Are you ready to see what happens next? Prepare yourself, because what's coming will shake you to your core. The sting of the humiliation he endured lingered in his mind, more deeply than any of the hateful words themselves. It wasn't just the woman's racist slurs that haunted him, but the look of sheer contempt, the way she judged him not for the content of his character but for the color of his skin. Marlon was not a man who thrived on confrontation. He had long believed that actions, far more than words, held the power to change minds. And on that day, he made a quiet but resolute decision to let his actions speak for him. After the tense exchange with the woman, he carried on as if the incident had never happened. He strolled through the building's familiar corridors, exchanged pleasantries with other residents, and eventually made his way to his office on the top floor. Few people knew that Marlon, in his quiet dignity, commanded the very building they all lived in. From his office overlooking the grand Mississippi River, he ran his thriving business, making decisions that touched the lives of not just the building's residents, but countless others across the city. He was a man of influence, yet he never flaunted it. As he sat at his desk, reviewing the day's documents and emails, the woman's words echoed in his thoughts. It wasn't the first time he had been the target of racism, but this time something shifted within him. The indifference he had once practiced so diligently wasn't enough anymore. This time he felt an urge to address it, to act not out of anger, but to ensure that such prejudice wouldn't be swept under the rug. He knew he had the power to do something, but it wasn't raw power he sought to wield. Instead, it was a quiet, measured response, one that would dismantle the racism he had faced, without ever stooping to her level of disdain. Hours later, Marlon decided to return to the lobby. As fate would have it, the woman was there once again, chatting casually with another resident, as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred earlier. The moment she noticed him approach, her expression hardened, and that familiar sneer twisted her lips. However, this time Marlon detected a subtle shift in her eyes. Beneath the surface, there was a flicker of doubt, an inkling that perhaps she had been wrong. Yet her pride held firm, too strong to allow her to admit the mistake she was beginning to sense. With a hollow smile, she addressed him again, her words dripping with feigned politeness. "Have you decided to leave yet, or are you still lingering around here?" Her voice was filled with the same arrogance as before, but something in her demeanor had shifted ever so slightly. Marlon stood calmly, letting the silence between them stretch just long enough to unsettle her. Then, with a composed and unwavering voice, he replied, "Don't worry, I'm exactly where I belong." The other resident, caught in the middle of an exchange they couldn't possibly understand, looked back and forth between them with confusion. There was a tension that hung in the air, thick with unspoken truths. Marlon, with the quiet dignity that had carried him through the day, simply gave a small nod, bidding them farewell as he turned toward the elevator. As the doors slid shut behind him, he left the woman standing there, her confidence momentarily shaken, unsure of what had just transpired. For the briefest of moments, her arrogance faltered, but Marlon knew this was just the beginning. His response, though subtle, was the first step in changing not just her view, but the prejudiced assumptions she carried with her every day. And it wasn't just for her sake. This was about confronting an injustice that he had endured for too long. He was not simply a resident of the building, he was the owner, and his quiet, deliberate actions would soon make that clear to everyone. As the elevator ascended, Marlon's mind carefully replayed the blueprint he had been crafting. There was no rush, no need for an immediate retaliation. He understood that true, lasting change required both time and patience, and that the ripple effect of a well-thought-out plan would be far more profound than any knee-jerk reaction. This wasn't just about addressing the woman's disrespect, it was about sending a powerful message to everyone that the right to belong wasn't dictated by shallow judgments, but by the strength, character, and actions of the people who were unfairly judged. Over the following days, a quiet tension began to settle in the building, like the calm before a storm. Marlon made small but significant tweaks in the building's routine that, while subtle, began to affect the individuals who thought of themselves as beyond reproach. He implemented new rules of coexistence, each one reinforcing respect, fairness, and equality among the residents, though few realized what was happening just yet. The culmination of these changes came in the form of a building-wide meeting. Marlon made a point of calling every resident to attend, announcing the introduction of new guidelines that aimed at always a stronger sense of community. The woman, still ignorant of Marlon's true role, arrived with the same smugness, certain that any changes would be unnecessary and ripe for her critique. As the meeting commenced, Marlon stood before the group with a poised and measured tone. His words were carefully chosen, direct, yet never confrontational. He spoke of the building as not just a structure of walls and apartments, but as a community that thrived only when mutual respect and equality were at its foundation. This building, he declared, his voice carrying a quiet authority, is not just a place where we live, it's a shared space where everyone, regardless of background or appearance, deserves to feel welcome and valued. The woman couldn't resist. She stood, her usual arrogance dripping from her words. And who exactly are you to decide that? Why should someone like you have the authority to dictate what happens here? Marlon met her gaze steadily, unwavering. A heavy silence fell over the room, and for a brief moment, it felt like the world had paused. He took a breath, and with a calmness that commanded the room's attention, he responded, "Who am I?" His voice was steady, nearly rhetorical. "I'm someone who believes that respect, dignity, and humanity are not privileges reserved for a select few, they're rights that belong to us all. And that truth, that fundamental principle, has nothing to do with the color of our skin, our status, or our position." The room was still, his words hanging in the air like a challenge. Those present felt the weight of what he had said, but no one more than the woman. For the first time, there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She felt something shift within her, an uneasy sense that the ground beneath her was no longer as solid as she had believed. There was something more going on here, something she had missed. But despite the rising tension in her chest, she remained silent, her usual sharp retort held back by an unfamiliar restraint. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 2 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. As the meeting came to a close, Marlon knew that the moment he had been preparing for was drawing near. He had laid the foundation and planted the seeds of awareness, but there was still more work to be done. The final move was yet to come, the moment when the truth would be fully revealed, and the woman's illusion of superiority would be irrevocably shattered. Marlon was orchestrating every step with precision, but the time to act hadn't quite arrived. For now, he would wait, allowing the weight of his words and actions to settle and take root. He knew that soon, very soon, the revelation would come. And when it did, it wouldn't just be the woman who learned a lesson. Everyone in that room, every resident who had ever turned a blind eye to injustice, would witness the full impact of what it meant to truly belong, not because of status, but because of integrity and grace. And so, the building hummed along in its usual rhythm, with residents going about their daily routines, unaware of the brewing storm beneath the surface. Yet an undercurrent of tension weaved through the hallways, growing stronger with each passing day. It was a feeling that hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable, as if the building itself was holding its breath in anticipation. Something significant was on the horizon, and while no one could quite put their finger on it, they knew that when it arrived, it would alter the fabric of their lives forever. The truth was waiting to be revealed, and when it did, it would shake the very foundation of what they believed about power, belonging, and respect. Among those feeling the shift most acutely was the woman who had humiliated Marlon. Her world, once so neatly ordered in her mind, was slowly unraveling. She couldn't shake the image of Marlon's composed face from her thoughts, the way he had stood before her with such calm, such certainty. His quiet confidence unnerved her more than she cared to admit. It was as though he knew something she didn't, and the weight of that knowledge was beginning to crush her self-assurance. She couldn't figure out what was wrong, but something deep inside her sensed that her moment of superiority was slipping away. Marlon, on the other hand, continued his life without haste, as calm and collected as ever. He remained in the background, his presence felt more than seen. While the tension in the building thickened, he moved with the patience of someone who knew how to play the long game. The pieces had been set in motion, and with every day that passed, they were inching closer to a revelation that would not only expose the truth but deliver a lesson on dignity and respect that no one would soon forget. Weeks after the condominium meeting, the atmosphere had become almost palpable. The residents sensed that something was coming, something that would shift the delicate balance of their community. Even those who had remained indifferent to the incident between Marlon and the woman now felt the crackling energy in the air. But it was the woman who felt it most keenly, a nagging sense of dread that she couldn't quite place. The tension gnawed at her, and she began to question the very foundation of her arrogance, yet she couldn't bring herself to confront it directly. In his office, high above the city, Marlon received the message he had been waiting for. His lawyer confirmed that everything was ready, every detail finalized. It was time. Not for retribution, but for justice, the kind of justice that would echo beyond that building, touching the lives of every resident and forcing them to confront their assumptions about who belonged and who didn't. Marlon wasn't driven by a need for revenge. His actions were calculated to deliver a message that would leave a lasting imprint on the hearts and minds of everyone involved. As he stood by the window, overlooking the Mississippi River, Marlon allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. He knew that what he was about to do would bring an end to the woman's arrogance, but more importantly, it would demonstrate to the entire building that respect and dignity were not luxuries to be granted by the privileged. They were fundamental human rights, unshaken by wealth, status, or appearance. The final piece was now in place. Marlon was ready to act, not with anger, but with the wisdom and grace that had guided him through his life. The impact of what he was about to reveal would be far-reaching, rippling through the lives of those who had witnessed the injustice and forcing them to reconsider their own biases. He knew that after this, the dynamics of the building would change forever. That morning, he prepared himself for what was to come, his mind steady and his heart clear. The revelation would be swift, yet its effects would be enduring. What began as a moment of cruel humiliation would end with a powerful lesson on humility, justice, and the true meaning of strength. The time for patience had passed. Now was the time for action, and when the dust settled, no one would forget the day Marlon showed them all what it meant to belong. The woman, still unaware of the gravity of what was about to unfold, stood among a group of residents in the lobby, engaged in idle gossip about their neighbors' lives. The mundane conversation came to an abrupt halt as every phone in the group pinged simultaneously with a notification. Each resident stared down at the email they had just received. The message was simple but carried a weight that couldn't be ignored. An emergency meeting was being called for that evening, and attendance was mandatory. The email was signed by Marlon. She furrowed her brow, irritation flashing across her face. "What does he want now?" she muttered, the disdain in her voice unmistakable. First, that speech about respect, and now this? Who does he think he is to make so many demands? The other residents exchanged puzzled glances, their curiosity piqued, but none of them knew the answer. The air was charged with a sense of uncertainty. Whatever this meeting was about, it was bound to change something fundamental within the building. As night fell, the lobby filled with residents, the usual hum of conversation replaced by thick anticipation. All eyes turned toward the entrance as Marlon stepped into the room, exuding a quiet authority. He was dressed simply, but it was his posture, his unwavering confidence, that captured everyone's attention. The murmurs ceased as he calmly looked over the crowd, pausing before he spoke. "I appreciate you all coming," Marlon began, his voice steady yet commanding. "Tonight I've asked you here because there is something important. You all need to know, something that will affect every one of us, and more importantly, the community we share." The woman, arms crossed and eyes narrowed, watched him intently. She couldn't put her finger on it, but something about Marlon seemed different tonight. There was a shift in his energy, a certainty she hadn't noticed before. He continued, "This building, as many of you are aware, has a deep history here in New Orleans. Over the years, it's witnessed countless stories, some filled with joy, others marked by challenges. But no matter what, it has always stood as a symbol of the community we've built together. Recently, however, we've faced issues that go far beyond the physical walls of this place, issues that strike at the core of how we treat each other. And frankly, it's something that can't be ignored any longer." Marlon paused, letting his words hang in the air, the silence thick with anticipation. "Over the past several weeks, I have made decisions with one goal in mind: to ensure that this building remains a place where every resident, regardless of background or appearance, feels welcome and respected. And tonight I'm here to share with you the truth, something many of you may not have been aware of. All eyes were glued to him now, but no one more so than the woman. Her expression had shifted from irritation to unease, though she still had no idea what was coming. Marlon turned, locking eyes with her. "Many of you might not know," he said, his voice unwavering, "but I own this building." A wave of astonished gasps rippled through the room. The woman's face paled as the truth hit her. She blinked rapidly, her mouth opening slightly, but no words came. It was as though the ground had disappeared from beneath her feet, leaving her suspended in disbelief. Marlon didn't wait for the room to settle. He pressed on, his gaze still firmly on her. "For all this time I have observed, I have listened, and I have reflected on how to best approach certain situations that have crossed the line of what is acceptable in this community. One thing I cannot and will not tolerate is disrespect, especially when it is fueled by racial prejudice." The woman's expression shifted from shock to panic. She opened her mouth as if to protest, but no sound escaped. It was as though every defense she had built was crumbling under the weight of his words. Marlon, his voice calm but now carrying the full weight of his authority, continued, "Respect is not something you demand from others, it is something you earn through your actions. And in this building, no one will be judged by the color of their skin or by shallow assumptions. We are all here because we belong. After all, we have earned our place." The woman was frozen, her eyes wide with disbelief. The truth, stark and undeniable, hung in the air like a heavy weight pressing down on her. In that moment, everything she thought she knew about power, status, and superiority was shattered. She had judged him without knowing who he truly was. And now the enormity of her mistake was laid bare before her, in front of everyone. Marlon's voice softened slightly, but the firmness in his tone remained. "You," he said, looking directly at her, "more than anyone should understand that respect cannot be demanded, it must be earned. And tonight we move forward as a community that embraces that truth." The room was utterly silent, every resident absorbing the gravity of what had just been said. The woman, for the first time, was speechless, her arrogance replaced by a deep sense of humiliation. Marlon had not only revealed his true position, but had also given everyone present a powerful reminder of what it meant to treat others with dignity. This was more than just a confrontation, it was a turning point, one that would forever redefine the dynamics of the building. Marlon had said what needed to be said, not out of anger, but out of a deep sense of justice. The truth had been laid bare, and the lesson delivered. From that night on, the building, and everyone in it, would never be the same again. Blatantly and unfairly denied, justice needed to be served. Marlon paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the room. "A while ago, I decided that I wouldn't respond to your humiliation with hatred or revenge, but with the truth. And the truth is, you no longer have a place here." His voice, calm but resolute, sliced through the tension. "From today onwards, your rental contract will not be renewed. You have 30 days to vacate the property." The revelation fell like a bomb, detonating in the silent room. Shock rippled through the residents, their faces frozen in disbelief. The woman opened her mouth to speak, but her voice cracked under the pressure of the moment. She had been blindsided. As she struggled to process the gravity of Marlon's words, the room remained still, the atmosphere thick with the impact of his decision. "This is not just my decision," Marlon continued, his eyes sweeping the room. "It's a message. A message that respect is a two-way street. When that respect is broken so profoundly, consequences are inevitable. And unfortunately, for her, that consequence is that she must now find a new place to live." The silence that followed was almost unbearable, stretching on for what felt like an eternity. The woman finally found her voice, her words dripping with disbelief. "You can't do this," she shouted, her hands trembling. "I have rights and I will fight this. You're abusing your power. This is completely unfair." Marlon remained unshaken, his demeanor steady and composed. "Unfair," he repeated, his voice soft yet brimming with undeniable strength. "What's truly unfair is judging someone by the color of their skin, deciding their worth based on your prejudices. But you're right, everyone does have rights. And your right is now to find a new home, where perhaps you can reflect on your actions. This decision is not up for debate. It is final." Her lips quivered as she tried to respond, but no words came. The other residents exchanged glances, still absorbing the magnitude of what had just transpired. They could feel the justice in Marlon's words, even if it was cold and uncomfortable. Many of them had witnessed the woman's behavior firsthand. and now they understood that Marlon's decision was not born of revenge, but of necessity. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 3 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. I have kept my role as the owner of this building private for years, Marlon said, his voice steady as he addressed the group. I did this because I believe that everyone should be treated equally regardless of who holds the title of ownership. But today proves that sometimes it's necessary to remind everyone responsible for ensuring that equality. The woman stood motionless, her face ashen with shock. She had always viewed herself as above others, superior in every way. But now, in front of the people she knew, she had been exposed. Her sense of entitlement had crumbled in the face of truth, leaving her humiliated and small. This is a joke, she mumbled, more to herself than to anyone else. But no one laughed. The atmosphere remained serious, heavy with the weight of a hard lesson learned. Marlon took a slow breath before speaking again. You have 30 days to leave. If you require assistance with your move, I will ensure that you have support. Understand this was not a decision I took lightly. It's a decision made from the responsibility I carry, not just as the owner of this building, but as a human being. His words hung in the air, unchallenged. Respect was non-negotiable, and when it was broken in such a profound way, the consequences had to follow. She finally resigned to silence, defeated. There was no argument left to make. Marlon, however, stood there not with satisfaction, but with a calm acceptance of what needed to be done. His actions weren't about power, they were about setting a precedent, ensuring that this building would become a place where respect and equality were the foundations upon which everything else was built. As the residents began to leave, murmurs filled the air. Some were still processing what had unfolded, while others glanced back at Marlon with a newfound respect. The truth had hit hard, and many of them recognized the courage it took for him to take this stand. Marlon, now standing alone in the lobby, watched as the last of the residents left the room. He knew this was just the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where prejudice would no longer be tolerated. It wasn't about him wielding power. It was about making sure everyone understood that respect isn't conditional. It doesn't depend on someone's race, status, or background. It is a right, inherent to all who live there, and it was now clear that this truth would be upheld, no matter the cost. As the lobby emptied and silence settled once again, Marlon took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his actions. The battle wasn't over, but this was a victory for fairness, for dignity, for all those who had been quietly watching from the sidelines. The message had been delivered, and he knew that from this moment forward, everything in that building would change. He walked toward the elevator, knowing that while there was still much work to be done, the most important message had been sent. Justice had been served, not with vengeance, but with clarity and strength. And in that silence, the building itself seemed to breathe easier, as though it too had been waiting for this moment of truth. Upon returning to their apartment, each resident found themselves lost in thought, reflecting on the powerful scene they had just witnessed. Marlon's revelation and his decision to expel the woman echoed through the halls of the building and in the minds of those who lived there. The clarity of Marlon's actions was undeniable, yet beneath the surface, a moral complexity began to take shape. The humiliation that had sparked this chain of events had come full circle, but now, in the wake of his decision, a deeper question lingered. There was no turning back from the truth. Marlon had made his stand, but the story was far from over. Conversations in the building took on a different tone. Some residents, moved by Marlon's strength, agreed with his choice, believing that such a firm stance at prejudice was not only justified but necessary. Yet others, while acknowledging the need for action, began to quietly question whether expulsion was truly the best solution. Would casting the woman out only perpetuate the very cycle of prejudice and resentment that Marlon sought to dismantle? As days passed and the news of Marlon's decision spread, these conflicting opinions weighed heavily on him. No matter how resolute he had been, he couldn't escape the whispers of doubt that had begun to creep into Kiev. Marlon had always stood firmly by his principles, but now, as he spent long hours in his office, those principles were being tested. He wrestled with the possibility that, in his pursuit of justice, he had inadvertently crossed a line. The question gnawed at him: had he become what he despised? By pushing the woman out, had he, in some way, mirrored the exclusion that he had fought so hard against? One afternoon, as Marlon gazed out over the bustling streets of New Orleans, lost in his thoughts, a knock at his door pulled him from his reflection. Opening it, he found one of the building's longest-standing residents, a gentle, elderly woman whose presence commanded respect. She had lived in the building for years, watching generations of tenants come and go. With slow but purposeful steps, she entered and sat down across from Marlon, her eyes full of understanding and wisdom. "You did what you thought was right," the woman began softly, her voice warm and steady. "But what's right isn't always simple." Marlon nodded silently, knowing that the conversation would force him to confront the doubts that had been swirling inside him. She continued, "I've seen much in my time here. People come and go and patterns repeat. What you did was fair, but justice, even when it's needed, can leave scars. The question is, Marlon, what kind of scars do you want to leave behind?" Marlon looked at her, her words sinking in. There was a truth in her observation that he couldn't deny. Expelling the woman had been a necessary step in holding her accountable. But now he began to wonder if there was a way to go beyond mere punishment. Could he not only respond to the wrong done, but also foster a path toward healing? Was it possible to offer redemption, even when the initial offense had been so filled with contempt? "I've been asking myself the same thing," Marlon admitted, his voice quieter now. "I wonder if there's a way to teach her, and all of us, a lesson that doesn't just create more division. Is there a way to make her understand the harm she's caused, to help her grow from this, rather than just sending her away?" The elderly woman smiled gently, her eyes gleaming with approval. "Perhaps," she said, "there's a way to show her the real impact of her actions, to make her face the consequences, but also to give her a chance to change. That's never easy, and it's much harder than simply asking her to leave. But it might lead to real, lasting change, not just for her, but for everyone who witnessed this." Her words struck a chord deep within Marlon. He had always believed in fairness, in the strength of standing up for what was right. But now he saw that real justice required more than drawing a hard line between right and wrong. It required empathy, understanding, and the ability to transform not just the space around him, but the people who inhabited it. Could he offer her a chance to atone for her actions, to learn from her mistakes, even after she had acted so disrespectfully? And if so, how would that change the course of their community? "Justice isn't always about punishment," the woman continued, her voice thoughtful. "Sometimes it's about creating the space for people to grow. That's where true strength lies, offering a second chance, even when it's difficult to do so." Marlon's mind raced as he considered her words. Expelling the woman had felt like the right thing to do at the time, but now he wondered if there was another way, a way to not only address the wrong, but also create the opportunity for real reflection and growth. It was a moral dilemma that went beyond the immediate situation. Could he, in good conscience, offer her that chance? Could he balance justice with mercy in a way that didn't undermine the message he had so strongly delivered? As he sat there, the weight of the decision pressed down on him, but so too did the clarity that had been missing before. The hardest battles, he realized, weren't with others, they were the ones fought within ourselves. To truly lead this community, to create the change he wanted to see, he would need to confront this challenge head-on. And so Marlon resolved to act again, but this time, not with the cold finality of expulsion. Instead, he would offer a different path, a path that required the woman to face her prejudice and to make amends, not only to him but to the entire community. It would be a difficult road for her, but if she was willing to take it, there might be hope for redemption after all. The decision wasn't easy, but it felt right. True justice wasn't just about making the guilty pay, it was about creating the possibility for transformation, growth, and healing. And Marlon, now more than ever, was ready to see if that kind of justice could be achieved. When the elderly woman left, Marlon sat in the quiet of his office, alone with his thoughts. The path he had chosen to evict the woman was the simplest route, one that might have seemed justified but left him feeling uneasy. Deep down, he knew that meaningful change wasn't born from ease but from challenge, and it was now clear to him that the challenge lay in finding a way to foster understanding. That meant extending a hand to someone who had humiliated him and treating her with dignity despite her actions. But the question loomed, could he take that step? And perhaps more importantly, would she be willing to meet him halfway? The dilemma weighed heavily on his heart. Marlon understood that by sticking to his original decision, he might send a message of strength, but that message would be one of force rather than growth. He had no desire to continue the cycle of hatred or resentment that had poisoned their interaction from the beginning. Instead, he longed for a resolution that would encourage transformation, not just punishment. He spent days wrestling with this inner conflict, knowing that any decision he made would have profound consequences. It was clear that finding the balance between justice and humanity was not only about what was right, but what was necessary to create real change. And for that, he realized he needed to approach the situation with empathy, something far more difficult than simply delivering justice. After several days of contemplation, Marlon reached his decision. He knew he needed to offer the woman another chance, an opportunity to reflect on her actions and perhaps grow from them. He called a meeting, but unlike the last gathering, this one would involve only her. The meeting was scheduled to take place in the same lobby where everything had started. When the day arrived, Marlon waited patiently in the otherwise empty room. The air was thick with anticipation. The woman entered cautiously, her posture rigid with nerves. She expected a continuation of the confrontation, another round of consequences. But as soon as she looked at Marlon, she sensed something different about him. He appeared calm, even peaceful, yet there was a sense of resolve in his eyes. Before she could speak, Marlon began. "I've spent a lot of time reflecting on what happened between us, on the humiliation you inflicted, Dee, and on the decision I made to ask you to leave." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I could carry on with that decision, stand firm, and force you to go, hoping you might learn something from it. But I've come to realize there may be another way." The woman frowned, uncertainty clouding her face. She wasn't sure what he was proposing, but she could sense this wasn't the rebuke she had feared. Marlon continued, his voice steady. "I gave you 30 days to vacate the building, but I'm reconsidering that decision. What I'm offering you now is a chance to reflect, to learn from what happened here, and perhaps change. If you're willing, we can talk, understand what led to this, and see if there's a way to rebuild instead of simply destroying what's left of this situation." The woman was stunned into silence. This was not what she had expected. She had prepared herself for more confrontation, more consequences, but here was Marlon, offering her something she never imagined, an opportunity to make amends. Shame began to wash over her as she recalled her actions, but along with it came a sense of uncertainty. Could she face the truth about herself and her prejudices? Could she rise to the challenge Marlon was presenting? For a long moment she stood there, her mind swirling with conflicting emotions. Finally she spoke, her voice quieter than before. "I never thought you would give me a second chance," she admitted, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I know I made a mistake. I misjudged you ... and I've been wrong in ways I'm only just starting to understand. Maybe I don't deserve this, but I'm willing to try." Marlon studied her for a moment, searching for sincerity in her words. He saw it, the hesitation of someone coming to terms with their flaws, but also a willingness to learn. "If you truly mean that," Marlon said, "we can work through this. But understand it won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight. Respect isn't something that's granted with words alone. You'll need to prove through your actions that you've changed, not just to me, but to everyone in this building." The woman nodded slowly, processing the gravity of what lay ahead. She understood that this was not a free pass, nor was it simply a chance to stay. It was an invitation to reflect, to engage in the difficult work of unlearning her prejudices and repairing the damage she had caused. The road would be long, and she would need to confront the parts of herself she had tried so hard to ignore. Marlon, for his part, felt a sense of relief. He had chosen the harder path, one that required him to offer forgiveness and seek understanding where most would have closed the door. But this was the only way forward that felt right, one that could lead to true healing rather than lingering resentment. "Let's start with an honest conversation," Marlon said. "We'll talk about what happened, and more importantly, why it happened. If you're open to that, we can move forward together, not as adversaries, but as people trying to build something better." If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 4 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. The woman looked up, her eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and fear. "I'm ready to try," she whispered. In that moment, both of them understood that this wasn't just about rectifying a past wrong. It was about creating the possibility for real growth and change, not just for the woman, but for the entire community. Marlon knew that by offering her a second chance, he wasn't just deciding for her, he was setting a precedent for how they would all move forward as a collective with respect, understanding, and dignity at the heart of it all. The end of this story was still unwritten, but for the first time, both Marlon and the woman felt that perhaps, just perhaps, it could be a new beginning. She nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle onto her shoulders. It was clear to her now this was her last chance to make things right, to correct the mistakes that had shaped her actions. Marlon wasn't asking for perfection, nor was he expecting immediate change. What he sought was a genuine effort, a willingness to grow, to understand, and to evolve. For the first time, she realized that the issue extended beyond how she treated others. It was also about how she viewed herself and the world around her. Accepting Marlon's offer of redemption meant accepting that she had much to learn and change in her life. The days that followed were ones of quiet transformation. Marlon stayed true to his promise, guiding her along the difficult path of self-reflection and growth. He was patient and supportive, yet unwavering in holding her accountable for her actions. She would need to take ownership of her past, face the harm she had caused, and work tirelessly to rebuild the respect she had shattered. Marlon involved her in the building's community activities and events that drew together residents from diverse backgrounds, each with their own unique stories. These gatherings became more than just social events. They were opportunities for her to listen, to observe, and to understand. Slowly, through conversations and shared experiences, she began to grasp the real impact of her words and actions. She learned to see others not through the lens of prejudice, but with empathy and understanding. As time passed, the building itself transformed. What had once been a mere collection of apartments became something more, a community in the truest sense of the word. Through Marlon's calm, steady leadership, the atmosphere shifted. Residents no longer existed in isolation from one another. They began to connect, learn from each other, and celebrate the differences that enriched their shared space. And the woman, who had once been so full of contempt, became an active participant in this new chapter of the building's life. In the end, the woman was not expelled. She chose to stay, and more importantly, she chose to change. Her transformation wasn't immediate, nor was it without setbacks, but it was genuine. Through her involvement in the community and her interactions with others, she slowly internalized the lessons Marlon and the residents imparted to her, that respect is not a given, but a mutual exchange, and that prejudice has no place in a truly just and equitable society. As for Marlon, he became more than just the owner of the building. He became a symbol of resilience and wisdom, a living example of how to face hatred with dignity and how to turn moments of injustice into opportunities for growth. His decision to give the woman, and by extension, the entire community, a second chance proved that true change requires more than punishment. It requires understanding, patience, and the courage to offer a path forward even when it's difficult. The building, once a place of tension and inequality, evolved into a space where everyone could coexist with respect and dignity. The woman's story of redemption echoed throughout the community, reminding them all that people are capable of change, that the past does not define the future, and that the power of justice lies in its ability to heal, not harm. In the end, the lesson Marlon imparted was not just for the woman who had humiliated him, it was for everyone. It was a reminder that the choices we make in moments of adversity shape not only ourselves but the world around us. By choosing empathy over anger, growth over retribution, and justice over revenge, Marlon had shown them all the true strength of the human spirit. The story of the building, now a place of understanding and unity, stands as a testament to the transformative power of forgiveness and the lasting impact of the choices we make in the face of injustice. As we come to the end of this story, we're left with some profound lessons about justice, redemption, and the power of empathy. Marlon's journey wasn't just about standing up to prejudice, it was about showing that true strength lies in offering others the opportunity to change. Now, we want to ask you, what have you learned from this story? Think about one thing you've learned from Marlon's approach and share in the comments how you plan to bring that lesson into your own life. Whether it's choosing empathy over anger, giving someone a second chance, or standing up for what's right in a calm and dignified way, let us know how this story has impacted you. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more stories that inspire growth and understanding. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to hear your thoughts.